Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, January 30th, 2025. So I just finished recording my show and just saw the news that a inbound passenger jet in Washington, D.C. apparently collided with the U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter. And we don't really know many details right now, but the plane crashed into the Potomac River as a result of being hit by this Black Hawk helicopter. There were 60 people on board. We don't know how many are dead at this point. I just saw some reports that a few people were pulled alive out of the Potomac River, but there's probably a lot of people dead. I don't understand how this could happen, how Army Black Hawk helicopter could hit a passenger jet, but it's basically all the details that we know at this point. So it was, American Airlines says that there were 60 passengers and 4 crew on board. And again, at this point, we don't know how many were killed or anything like that, but just a tragedy. And hopefully we get more details of how this could have happened. But anyway, here's the rest of the show that I recorded before I knew about this horrible news. So I hope you enjoy the show. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today: Witkoff pushes for full Gaza truce deal. So President Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem on Wednesday and pushed for a full implementation of the Gaza ceasefire deal. And this is based on Israeli media reports. According to Haaretz, the U.S. wants to ensure Netanyahu will move forward with the talks on the second phase of the deal, which is supposed to involve a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. But many details need to be worked out. And the way that the deal works is, I believe it's the 16th day of the ceasefire that they're supposed to begin talks on the second phase. So a lot is up in the air, but according to these Israeli reports and based on what Witkoff has been saying publicly, it does seem like the Trump administration is, at least for now, pushing for this deal, the second phase at least, to be implemented. So Netanyahu is under pressure from Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who has threatened to quit the government if the genocidal war is not restarted after the 42-day ceasefire. That's part of the first phase. Smotrich has claimed that Netanyahu guaranteed that military operations would resume after the first phase. The Haaretz report said that the U.S. wants Netanyahu to go through with the full deal despite the political ramifications it could have for his government. Netanyahu has every interest to stay in power. He could be facing prison over the corruption charges brought against him if he loses power. And if Smotrich's religious Zionism party quits the government, Netanyahu's coalition would lose the majority in the Knesset. That doesn't automatically trigger elections, but the Knesset could vote for elections. The opposition has said that they would bail Netanyahu out if he agreed to this deal, but how long is that going to last? So he certainly, Netanyahu has keeping power on his mind. So he has an interest in keeping the country at war. And I think that's why we're seeing, part of the reason why we're seeing the escalations in the West Bank and the continued occupation of Lebanon. So the Netanyahu-Witkoff meeting came a day before Hamas is set to release 3 more Israeli hostages and 5 Thai nationals in exchange for Israel releasing 110 Palestinians from prison. Witkoff also visited the Israeli-controlled Netzarim corridor in Gaza, making him the first U.S. official to actually enter Gaza in more than a decade. So he went in there to the Netzarim corridor to oversee some aspects of the ceasefire, and that's where Palestinians are passing through to return to the ruins of northern Gaza. And they have these American contractors, American mercenaries essentially, doing inspections of the vehicles that are going through. So apparently that's where Witkoff went. And he said recently, that he's going to have a near constant presence in the region. He's going to be in the Middle East quite a bit in this role as Trump's Middle East envoy. So the ceasefire in Gaza is incredibly fragile, and Israeli forces have continued to fire on Palestinians. They've killed more than 80 since the ceasefire went into effect on January 19th. And we'll get into that in this next story here. All right, the next one. Israel killed over 80 in Gaza since the ceasefire went into effect. So since the Gaza ceasefire went into effect on January 19th, Israeli forces have killed more than 80 Palestinians across Gaza. And this was reported by Drop Site News. Dr. Zahir al-Wahidi, the director of information for Gaza's health ministry, told Drop Site News that 49 of the dead were killed by Israeli troops in the southern city of Rafah, where many bodies remain buried under the rubble. And I've seen other reports saying, certain areas of Rafah, Palestinians haven't been able to return to. They've been getting fired on there. So 49 killed in Rafah. I mean, that is a lot in 10 days, 11 days. And you see the rubble of Rafah in this picture. This is where Biden said he would only support a limited incursion, and Israel has completely destroyed the city. So al-Wahidi also said that since January 19th, 470 bodies have been recovered from the rubble, including 150 in Rafah. He said, quote, "We need caterpillars and bulldozers to clear up the wreckage and recover these corpses. People are getting back to literally nothing. Rafah is destroyed and the killing and bombing continue there," end quote. The health ministry said Wednesday in its daily update that Gaza hospitals received another 63 bodies over the previous 24-hour period. 59 of the bodies were recovered from the rubble. 2 Palestinians died of previously sustained wounds, and then there were 2 more killed by Israeli forces over that time period. In several instances, the Israeli military has claimed it opened fire on Palestinians who posed a threat to Israeli troops on the ground. But the IDF also shot and killed an unarmed Israeli contractor who was dressed in civilian clothes. And we got more details about that incident from the Israeli side because they killed an Israeli. And the Israeli media said that this guy was dressed in civilian clothes, unarmed, and was simply shot at by the IDF because he was approaching them. And that goes to show the free reign that they have to shoot unarmed civilians in Gaza still, even after the ceasefire has gone into effect. And we know throughout this thing, Israeli troops have killed unarmed civilians and counted them as terrorists. And this was a practice exposed by Israeli media. So Gaza's health ministry said that the latest violence and the recovered bodies have brought the death toll since October 2023 to 47,417, a number that is considered a significant undercount. A study published by The Lancet said that the true death toll as of October 2024 was likely over 70,000, and that only includes people killed by military action. When you get into the indirect deaths caused by the siege, starvation, medical conditions, all these babies dying from the weather exposure, or just from being born prematurely and having health problems and the lack of formula, just all these different things. Then you get into the hundreds of thousands dead, killed as a result of this U.S.-backed Israeli siege and bombing campaign. All right, so the next one here. Trump signs executive order to target pro-Palestine activists. So on Wednesday, President Trump signed an executive order to crack down on pro-Palestinian activism in the U.S. in the name of combating anti-Semitism, and this could lead to the deportation of foreign students involved in protests. Pro-Israel politicians have labeled protests against Israel's genocidal war in Gaza that have taken place at college campuses as anti-Semitic, even though many Jewish students and organizations have participated and organized these protests. But doesn't matter. They've been labeled anti-Semitic. That's something President Biden said as well. It's not just Republicans. So Trump's order directs U.S. government agencies to identify all civil and criminal authorities or actions that could be used to curb or combat anti-Semitism, and it refers to incidents on college campuses. That's what they're talking about here, is these protests. The order says the Attorney General shall submit a report analyzing court cases against or involving institutions of higher education alleging civil rights violations related to or arising from post-October 7th, 2023 campus anti-Semitism. And they must indicate in this report if the Attorney General is going to take action over these cases. And the section of the order that could result in the deportations directs U.S. agencies to come up with recommendations to familiarize colleges with grounds for foreigners with visas to be deemed inadmissible, which means they would not be permitted by law to remain in the U.S. The order says that colleges should monitor for and report activities by alien students, and when appropriate, actions should be taken to remove them. So under the pretext, they're trying to make this all under the pretext of them breaking the law that they would do this. But, if they're going to be looking at these protests, people have been arrested on these college campuses for all sort of unjust reasons as a result of these protests. And then there's also the anti-discrimination laws that some states use this definition. I forget the organization. It's like the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance or something. They use their definition of anti-Semitism to enforce anti-discrimination laws. And that definition of anti-Semitism lists as examples of anti-Semitism criticism of the state of Israel. They list comparing it to Nazi Germany as anti-Semitism. I forget the exact details, but basically criticism of Israel is covered under there. So there's all sorts of problems with this executive order, of course. And this is something on the campaign trail. Trump vowed that he would deport pro-Palestinian protesters. And then you have this one crazy Zionist group that's saying they're giving names of people to the administration of foreigners that have been involved in protests that should be deported. All right, so the next one here, Israel hints at extended Lebanon occupation. So this one's from Jason Ditz. Only a few days ago, the U.S. and Israel announced the extension of the 60-day ceasefire in Lebanon, which allows the Israeli occupation to continue through at least February 18th. But IDF officials are now making comments suggesting that it may be longer than that. An unnamed senior Israeli military official was quoted in Israeli media as saying the military should not withdraw until the Lebanese army has demonstrated good and sufficient control over the country. So this could be a catch-22 because the Lebanese army has been prevented from deploying into the southernmost villages of Lebanon because they're still occupied by Israel. Since that occupation is continuing, the Lebanese army is unlikely to have more control by February 18th than they do right now. And this effectively gives Israel an excuse to extend its occupation for longer, to go past February 18th. And again, if this Gaza ceasefire deal continues to hold, Netanyahu has a lot of incentive to escalate somewhere else. And Lebanon could certainly be the place that he's looking to do that. So IDF officials said that during the new ceasefire extension, they will continue to prevent civilians from returning to their homes in southern villages and towns. They will also continue to destroy what they call terrorist areas, which in practice has meant setting houses on fire and damaging farm fields. And on Wednesday, Israel continued shooting at civilians trying to return to their homes. The largest incident was in Majd al-Salm, where 5 people were wounded by a drone attack. All right, so the next one here, West Bank, Israeli airstrike kills 10 Palestinians in Tammoun. So very little detail about this strike. I just put up, this is a story from Wafa, the Palestinian news agency. 10 Palestinians were killed and several others were injured on Wednesday night in an Israeli airstrike on the town of Tammoun, southeast of Tubas in the occupied West Bank. According to a brief statement from the Palestinian Ministry of Health, 10 fatalities and a number of wounded individuals arrived at the Tubis governmental hospital following the horrific attack. The recent escalation is part of a large-scale Israeli offensive in the northern West Bank, with the cities of Jenin and Tulkarm and their refugee camps being the focus of the assault. So the operations in Jenin continue in the northern West Bank, but it seems to be Israel seems to be escalating in other areas, still mostly focused on the northern West Bank. But this is a big airstrike, and we'll probably get more details about it tomorrow. But again, this is just another area where Israel is really escalating. All right, so the next one here, leaked alleged Trump plan to end the Ukraine war. So the Ukrainian news outlet Strana has published leaked details of President Trump's alleged plan to end the war in Ukraine in 100 days. So according to Newsweek, which said it could not verify if these details were accurate, the plan starts with holding a phone call between Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin in late January or early February. So essentially the idea here is the plan gives like a timeline for when they want the deal to be done. And it says, first things first, Trump speaks with Putin either at the end of January or early February. We haven't seen that happen yet. Hopefully that happens soon. And then the next step is for an in-person meeting with both Vladimir Putin and Zelensky separately, as far as I understand it, and in February or March. And the leaked plan calls for a ceasefire to be declared by Easter, which falls on April 20th. The truce, the ceasefire would involve Ukraine withdrawing from Kursk, the Russian oblast that it has invaded. And then once the ceasefire comes into effect, there would be a peace conference to hammer out the details of a lasting agreement. And the plan calls for a deal to be reached by May 9th. So relatively quick, between April 20th and May 9th, they want a deal to be worked out. And this plan has some details of what might be a ceasefire deal. I guess these are, again, according to these reports, this is U.S. proposals for a ceasefire deal. It would, so another detail that's interesting is once the details of the agreement are released, Ukraine would then be instructed to end martial law and mobilization. And that would mean Zelensky could lose power because his presidential term expired in May 2024. He did not hold elections, and he used martial law as the excuse not to hold elections. So once martial law is gone, and especially if it's after Ukraine signed a deal that ceded territory to Russia, people are going to want elections. And I mean, I would think Zelensky would have no chance of winning. So that's another thing, when we talk about the individuals in power, what their incentives are. It does seem like Zelensky has an incentive not to do a deal like this, but at the same time, what are his real options? He's pretty much out of options at this point. If the U.S. decides to cut him off, he's done. But anyway, so some of the ideas, according to this plan for a Russian-Ukrainian peace deal, include barring Ukraine from joining NATO, an agreement for Ukraine to join the EU by 2030. Russia has always said that they wouldn't stop Ukraine from joining the EU. The EU facilitating Ukraine's construction. The plan does call for Ukraine being able to keep its military at its current level and continue receiving military aid from the U.S. That's something that Russia might not go for. The proposal would also require Ukraine to cede the territory that Russia has captured. Ukraine would have to refuse military and diplomatic attempts to return the occupied territories and officially recognize the sovereignty of the Russian Federation over them. So that would be a major concession from Ukraine. But realistically, it's something they're going to have to do. So Zelensky's office has denied that this peace plan is authentic, although there's been other media reports that kind of align with it, that say Trump has given Keith Kellogg, his envoy to the conflict, a 100-day deadline. Get it done in 100 days. And if this plan is legitimate, this is leaked by a Ukrainian news outlet, that means that there could be the purpose of leaking it could be to sabotage it, to make it less likely to happen. So I think this plan, the details about Ukraine continuing to receive military aid. I mean, from the U.S., I mean, unless it's a very small amount, that's something I have a hard time believing Russia would go for. But, declaring a ceasefire and entering negotiations is I mean, that should happen right now. If they're not going to have the deal set by the time the ceasefire happens, I think it should just happen now. People are being killed every day over there. But this does seem like some more realistic proposals than some of the other things that we've seen reported. So again, I hope things happen sooner, but hopefully at least by Easter, the bloodshed stops in Ukraine. That would be great. All right, so the next one here, Russia says Ukrainian drones target a nuclear power plant. This one's from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So in one of its latest attacks, Ukraine launched over 100 drones targeting Russian energy infrastructure. One Russian official said that a nuclear power plant was among the targets. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, overnight Tuesday, its forces downed more than 100 Ukrainian drones. And one of the drones was down in the Smolensk region near a nuclear facility. The region's governor said, quote, according to preliminary information, one of the drones was shot down during an attempt to attack a nuclear power facility. There were no casualties or damage, end quote. In the Belgorod area, Russian authorities reported that a drone killed a woman and her 2-year-old child. These are attacks supported by the U.S. The U.S. has funded Ukraine's drone program through the CIA. So these are U.S.-backed attacks, U.S.-supported attacks, killing civilians inside Russia. These go on, every day. There's besides not just people being killed on the front lines of Ukraine, but also Ukrainians getting killed in Russian missile barrages and Russians getting killed by Ukrainian drones inside Russia. Not every day that people are being killed, but these attacks are happening every day. And so there's the chance of that. And we talk about nuclear power plants getting targeted. As long as this war goes on, there is still always that risk of escalation. One thing I have not seen since Trump came in, just from a quick perusing of Russian media, I haven't seen any reports of Ukraine firing the ATACMS or the Storm Shadows into Russia. So maybe that's something that the U.S. Stopped under Trump. I don't know. Haven't seen any reports that say that, but I just haven't seen that Ukraine is using the ATACMS in attacks on Russian territory. All right, so the next one here, Syria's Al-Qaeda branch dissolves and says that its goals are complete. So the Salafi jihadist group Haras al-Din, which is Syria's official Al-Qaeda affiliate, announced on Tuesday that it was dissolving, saying that its goals were complete following the regime change that ousted former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. So this reminds me of that memo, that email that Jake Sullivan sent to Hillary Clinton. I believe it was in 2012, that was released by WikiLeaks, when he said, AQ is on our side in Syria. And this really goes to show Assad is overthrown, and the Al-Qaeda affiliate, the official Al-Qaeda affiliate, says, our work is done here. So Haras al-Din said in a statement, quote, the sons of the Al-Qaeda jihad organization rushed to support the people of the Levant and assist them in removing injustice from them until God permitted the Sunni Muslim people to triumph over one of the most unjust tyrants of the modern era. In light of these developments on the Levantine scene, and by an Emir's decision from the General Command of Al-Qaeda in the Levant organization, we announced to our Muslim nation and to the Sunnis in the Levant the dissolution of the Guardians of Religion organization, end quote. And that's what Haras al-Din means in Arabic. So Haras al-Din formed in 2018 as an offshoot of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, and that's the group that led the offensive against Assad and now rules Syria. HTS was previously the official Al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria when it was known as the Al-Nusra Front, but HTS rebranded in 2016 to gain international support. And then so Haras al-Din, these guys said, hey, we still want to be, openly loyal to Ayman al-Zawahiri and Al-Qaeda. The U.S. says they killed Zawahiri, I think, in 2022 in a drone strike in Afghanistan. But anyway, they're There were some tensions between HTS and Haras al-Din. They were both based in Syria's northwest Idlib province before HTS took Damascus. And there was some clashes between them. In 2020, HTS began arresting some senior members of Haras al-Din. Around the same time, the U.S. kind of ramped up a drone war against Haras al-Din. And my theory, I haven't, real evidence of this, is more of just a hunch. My theory from covering it at the time, because we saw HTS start arresting these guys around the same time the U.S. was launching more drone strikes against them. My theory essentially was that the U.S. was cooperating with HTS against Haras al-Din, maybe getting intelligence from them on them. But the U.S. bombed Haras al-Din recently. In August 2024, the U.S. launched a drone strike against one of their leaders. So Haras al-Din told its members to keep their weapons and urged Syria's new leaders to keep Sunni Muslims armed. The group said, quote, "We advise them to keep the weapon in the hands of the Sunnis in the Levant in order for a nation to remain carrying weapons so that no tyrant will enslave it and no occupier will covet it," end quote. So Haras al-Din's fighters may merge with Syria's new HTS-led military, which has appointed foreign jihadists to senior positions. The dissolution announcement came after HTS's leader, Abu Muhammad al-Jilani, now known by his real name, Ahmed Hussein al-Shara. He said that there would be no more armed groups outside of the new HTS-led government's control. So Jilani, or I'm going to start calling him Shara, I think, because that's what he goes by now. But he's saying all the armed groups must dissolve, and then here we see Haras al-Din do so under the order of al-Qaeda. And again, these guys, were part of HTS at one point. I've seen some people who fancy themselves, ex-Syria experts saying that, there's no way Haras al-Din is going to merge with HTS after the fighting that they did in 2020. Definitely not going to happen, but I'm sure that they can make up and get over it. And we don't know if Haras al-Din was involved in the offensive. I have a feeling that they probably were, So, Shara or Jilani, who leads Syria, he was declared, this is another kind of big thing that happened in Syria on Wednesday, Jilani or Shara, it's hard for me not to call him Jilani, but he was declared the president of Syria on Wednesday. And he is the original founder of al-Qaeda in Syria. He started the Nusra Front. He was an ISIS operative at one point. This is who the U.S. helped put in charge in Syria. And now al-Qaeda is saying, mission accomplished. Our work here is done in Syria, basically. It's just really unbelievable. All right, so the next one here, Syria asks Russia to pay compensation and hand over Assad. So this article is from The Cradle. So according to this report, a Russian delegation made an official visit to Damascus on January 28th. So the Russians went to meet with Jilani or Shara. And this is the first time since the fall of Assad. Syrian officials reportedly requested compensation and said that Russia should hand over Assad to authorities in Damascus. The delegation was led by Russia's deputy foreign minister, Mikhail Bogdanov, and during the meeting, Bogdanov met with the de facto ruler of Syria and the head of HTS, Ahmad al-Shara, formerly known as Jilani. So apparently they are asking, Russia has been pulling its military out of Syria, out of the naval base that it had. And I think the idea here is that Syria, HTS is saying hand over Assad, and you could keep your bases here in Syria. And it's not really clear what's going to happen, but a lot of the Russian military has pulled out, but they still have the bases. They still have a presence. Hasn't been a total withdrawal. All right, so the next one here, the Philippines to train with the U.S. Typhon missile system. So a Philippine platoon will be trained on how to use a controversial U.S. missile system known as the Typhon that's been deployed in the Philippines since April 2024. So this is a very, again, controversial system. This was developed by the U.S. after the first Trump administration pulled out of the INF Treaty, which banned the development of short to medium range, medium range ground-based missile systems. And it can fire Tomahawk missiles, which have a range of over 1,000 miles, and they are capable of carrying nuclear warheads as well. It could also fire these SM-6 missiles that have a range of about 290 miles. And this is very provocative toward China, the U.S. deploying the system. China is very angry about it. The Philippines is saying they're going to buy one. And now they're saying that in February, U.S. troops are going to train them on how to use this. They're moving it around the Philippines, and they're doing this all very publicly. This is very provocative toward China. I mean, you put the shoe on the other foot. A Russian or Chinese missile system like this being deployed in Cuba and them doing these drills and talking about it all the time. How would the U.S. Feel about that? All right, so the last story here. Former Senator Bob Menendez is sentenced to 11 years. So this article is from NBC News. I haven't really been paying too much attention to Bob Menendez's case here. So he's the former head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He was a very powerful senator, total hawk, really bad on pretty much everything. And he was sentenced to 11 years in prison for a years-long bribery and corruption scheme that rewarded him with gold bars and stacks of cash. He was getting this stuff from an Egyptian businessman, and essentially in exchange, he was advancing policies that benefited Egypt. And when they raided his house, they found hundreds of thousands of dollars of cash stuffed away in like pockets of his coats, and they found in his shoes, and they found gold bars. It was like if they raided a mobster's house or something. I mean, just really such blatant corruption from Menendez, from this guy, who was just very recently a very powerful U.S. senator. And, he was begging the judge to show him mercy and apparently crying in court, and sentenced to 11 years. And he is, 71 years old? So, 11 years for someone who's 71 is a long time. And the original sentence, I think they were trying to give him 15 years, but they got him down to 11. Menendez is going away, and his wife is going to go on trial soon. She's implicated in everything as well, and she's probably going to go to jail. So this, I think, is the harshest sentence that a U.S. senator has ever gotten. The worst corruption that a senator's ever been convicted for, too. It didn't really get much attention, and even myself, I wasn't really following the case closely. But 11 years for Menendez seems like not that long ago. I was writing stories about him doing things in the Senate. All right, so that's the end. That's it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from David Stockman, NATO, the case to get out now. One from Judge Napolitano, a republic of spies. One from Jonathan Cook, Israel's genocide general welcome in London and the media yawns. One from Vijay Prashad, the tears of our children. Spotlight from Jim Loeb, new neocon manifesto, keep U.S. troops in the Middle East. And that's about this new neocon think tank led by Elliot Abrams, who was in the previous Trump administration and led the Venezuela policy. They put out their new manifesto. So go check that out. One thing I've been wanting to mention is Scott Horton interviewed Ben Cohen the other day about, he's got this little campaign going online. I think it's called Doge versus the Pentagon or something. And it's basically they're trying to get people to make memes. People are making memes about how Doge, which is this Department of Government Efficiency, should cut spending to the Pentagon. Ben Cohen is trying to push for them to make cuts, where it really matters, in the Pentagon, where there's all this real waste, and they're trying to do it by, getting Elon Musk's attention with memes. So go check out that interview. And Scott also proposed to Mr. Cohen a very great idea for a Ben & Jerry's flavored ice cream. Scott's idea was anti-war.cone, which I think is a wonderful idea. Ben seemed to like it, but he says he doesn't own it anymore and doesn't have the that much influence over day-to-day operations. But he did like it. So go check that out and check out Doge versus the Pentagon. And also check out our blog. We have a lot of good stuff over there. One from Matthew Ho, Kyle Angelo's show, Conflicts of Interest. Lots of content on the page, even if you listen to or watch this show. So that's it. You could always support us by sharing the show. Tell your friends about antiwar.com. Follow us on social media. I will be back. Tomorrow's the last show of the week, but I will see you then. Thanks for listening.